Good evening, and welcome to the Lyric Studio Theatre, where tonight we're going to listen to the poetry of Philip Larkin, read by Judi Dench and by Alan Bennett. I've met Larkin once or twice, but that's not why I've chosen his poetry for this programme. Nor is he my choice because of the ideas and values that his poetry portrays. Much of what Philip Larkin's poetry stands for I find pretty unattractive, but he writes so beautifully that I enjoy the sounds his words make inside my head. Judge for yourself. This is a typical Larkin poem, extolling the virtues of solitude. It's actually read by Philip Larkin on one of the rare occasions when he agreed to take part in a broadcast about his poetry.
Beyond all this, the wish to be alone. However the sky grows dark with invitation cards, however we follow the printed directions of sex, however the family is photographed under the flagstaff, beyond all this, the wish to be alone. Beneath it all, desire of oblivion runs, despite the artful tensions of the calendar, the life insurance, the tabled fertility rites, the costly aversion of the eyes from death. Beneath it all, desire of oblivion runs.
I first met Larkin over 25 years ago. He'd just become librarian at the University of Hull, and I was about to sit my final examinations. He sent for me to issue a warning about my persistent habit of keeping borrowed books for longer periods than the library rules allowed. I was cringingly apologetic, not knowing that, in his own words, he'd once retreated into self-isolation in Shropshire, with the complete Yeats stolen from the local girls' school. I was also astounded by his attitude. His predecessor, a venerable lady with grey bun and skirts which trailed the ground, had always appealed to my better nature by asking me to consider other students who needed the books I stole. Larkin simply said that when books were absent without leave, he had to perform uncongenial clerical duties, and that he was prepared to be as unpleasant as was necessary to stop me causing him such inconvenience. When later I first read one of his poems, I thought it reflected his cynical style of librarianship. The poem was called Wires.
The widest prairies have electric fences, for though old cattle know they must not stray, young steers are always scenting purer water, not here but anywhere. Beyond the wires leads them to blunder up against the wire, whose muscle-shredding violence gives no quarter. Young steers become old cattle from that day, electric limits to their widest senses.
A lot older and slightly wiser, I now realise that cynicism isn't an adequate description of that poem's spirit. It's about something both more subtle and more sad, the destructive effect of one touch of coal philosophy, or in the case of the once hopeful cattle, a touch of electrified wire. For Larkin, life offers no way to escape the taste of dust. Experience always saddens, all life's lessons are painful, the sparkling armada of promises ends in doctors' waiting rooms or in hospital ward, waiting for the great reaper to call, "Next, please."
Always too eager for the future, we pick up bad habits of expectancy. Something is always approaching. Every day till then, we say, watching from a bluff the tiny, clear, sparkling armada of promises draw near. How slow they are, and how much time they waste, refusing to make haste. Yet still they leave us holding wretched stalks of disappointment. For though nothing balks each big approach, leaning with brasswork prinked, each rope distinct, flagged, and the figurehead with golden tits arching our way, it never anchors. It's no sooner present than it turns to past. Right to the last, we think each one will heave to and unload all good into our lives, all we are owed for waiting so devoutly and so long. But we are wrong. only one ship is seeking us. A black-sailed unfamiliar, towing at her back a huge and birdless silence. In her wake, no waters breed or break.
Of course, being human, Larkin sees that on our way to the terminal ward, life will dangle before us a variety of apparent attractions. In Toads, he suggests that he allows himself occasional moments of regret that life has picked out a mundane path for him. However, I have no doubt that Larkin really regards the uneventful existence as the good life. On the few occasions he's been persuaded to discuss a poet's life, he's always dismissed the romantic notions of visionary experience and spiritual adventure. The Toads are inescapable visitors, and I suspect not totally unwelcome.
Toads. Why should I let the toad work squat on my life? Can't I use my wit as a pitchfork and drive the brute off? 6 days of the week it soils with its sickening poison just for paying a few bills. That's out of proportion. Lots of folk live on their wits, lecturers, lispers, losels, lob-lollymen, louts. They don't end as paupers. Lots of folk live up lanes with fires in a bucket, eat windfalls and tin sardines. They seem to like it. Their nippers have got bare feet, their unspeakable wives as skinny as whippets, and yet no one actually starves. Were I courageous enough to shout, "Stuff your pension," but I know all too well that's the stuff that dreams are made on. For something sufficiently toad-like squats in me too. Its hunkers are heavy as hard luck and cold as snow, and will never allow me to blarney my way to getting the fame and the girl and the money all at one sitting. I don't say one body's the other one's spiritual truth, but I do say it's hard to lose either when you have both.
You'll hear no more from me on the subject of Philip Larkin's character. A quarter of a century ago, I used to see him cycling to work on an elderly upright bicycle, and more recently I talked briefly with him in a London club. But I make no claim to know him. Others may choose to judge his work on the basis of his character and temperament, solitary, pessimistic, introspective. They'll relate his writings to his decision to live in Hull, the remote East Riding town, little known and rarely visited. However, in this programme, we don't subscribe to the psychological school of literary criticism. We're concerned with the tale, not the teller, the poetry, not the poet. We rely on the Larkin texts, which praise continuity, social stability, and the well-ordered society. These qualities are celebrated in Church-Going, a poem which concerns the proper attitude towards church buildings in an irreligious, indeed a sacrilegious age. It argues that even unbelievers should pay proper respect to the physical evidence of piety that has endured 2,000 years, not out of tolerance or gratitude, but because churches have proved durable and, in consequence, have stabilized and solidified society.
Church-going. Once I'm sure there's nothing going on, I step inside, letting the door thud shut. Another church, matting, seats and stone and little books, sprawlings of flowers for Sunday, brownish now, some brass and stuff up at the holy end, the small, neat organ, and a tense, musty, unignorable silence brewed God knows how long. Hatless, I take off my cycle clips in awkward reverence, move forward, and run my hand around the font. From where I stand, the roof looks almost new, cleaned or restored. Someone would know, I don't. Mounting the lectern, I peruse a few hectoring large-scale verses and pronounce, "Here endeth," much more loudly than I'd meant. The echoes snigger briefly. Back at the door, I sign the book, donate an Irish sixpence, and reflect the place was not worth stopping for. Yet stop I did. In fact, I often do, and always end, much at a loss like this, wondering what to look for. Wondering, too, when churches fall completely out of use, what we shall turn them into. If we shall keep a few cathedrals chronically on show, their parchment, plate, and pyx in locked cases, and let the rest rent free to rain and sheep? Shall we avoid them as unlucky places? Or after dark, will dubious women come to make their children touch a particular stone, pick simples for a cancer, or on some advised night see walking a dead one? Power of some sort or other will go on in games, in riddles, seemingly at random, but superstition, like belief, must die. And what remains when disbelief has gone? Grass, weedy pavements, brambles, buttress, sky, a shape less recognizable each week, a purpose more obscure. I wonder who will be the last, the very last, to seek this place for what it was. One of the crew that tap and jot and know what roodlops were, some ruin bibber, randy for antique, or Christmas addict, counting on a whiff of gowns and bands and organ pipes and myrrh? Or will he be my representative, bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silk dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub, because it held unspilled so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage and birth and death and thoughts of these, for which was built this special shell. For though I've no idea what this accoutred frowsty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. A serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. And that much never can be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising, a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which, he once heard, was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round.
Larkin's poems contain values that are in absolute conflict with my own view of life. His poetry is pessimistic, conservative with a little c, and obsessed with the bliss of solitude. I claim to be hopeful, radical, and gregarious. My temperament is much better represented by the robust Victorian optimism of Robert Browning. His characters always have cause for despair, but never despair. Forsaken lovers console themselves with the thought that the world might end tonight. Mortally wounded messengers fall dead, smiling. Painters paint on, undaunted by life's vicissitudes. God's in his heaven, with Elizabeth Barrett Browning by his side, and all's right with the world. Larkin's verse portrays life in diametrically different ways, yet it's all done so beautifully that its appeal is irresistible. Of course, I particularly enjoy the poems about the places that I knew and once loved. One poem is so evocative of the 50s on Humberside that I always think of it as There and Then. Its real title is Here.
Swerving east from rich industrial shadows and traffic all night north, swerving through fields too thin and thistled to be called meadows, and now and then a harsh named halt that shields workmen at dawn, swerving to solitude of skies and scarecrows, haystacks, hares and pheasants, and the widening river's slow presence, the piled gold clouds, the shining gull-marked mud, gathers to the surprise of a large town. Here domes and statues, spires and cranes cluster beside grain-scattered streets, barge-crowded water, and residents from raw estates, brought down the dead straight miles by stealing flat-faced trolleys, push through plate glass swing doors to their desires, cheap suits, red kitchenware, sharp shoes, iced lollies, electric mixers, toasters, washers, dryers. A cut-price crowd, urban yet simple, dwelling where only salesmen and relations come, within a terminate and fishy-smelling pastoral of ships-up streets, the slave museum, tattoo shops, consulates, grim headscarfed wives. And out beyond its mortgaged, half-built edges, fast shadowed wheat fields, running high as hedges, isolate villages, where removed lives loneliness clarifies. Here silence stands like heat. Here leaves unnoticed thicken, hidden weeds flower, neglected waters quicken. Luminously peopled air ascends, and past the poppy's bluish neutral distance ends the land suddenly beyond a beach of shapes and shingle. Here is unfenced existence, facing the sun, untalkative, out of reach.
More than familiarity attracts me to that poem. As with most of Larkin's work, despite values which I either reject or deplore, I'm captivated by the quality, the technical accomplishment, the clarity of the images, the ingenuity of the rhyming patterns, and the simple beauty of the choice of words. Philip Larkin's verse is the triumph of poetry, the victory of the writing itself over the ideas that the writing contains. It occupies a place in my affection comparable to the niche that holds Evelyn Waugh. I hate everything which Waugh's Brideshead Revisited stands for, but it's all done so beautifully that reading it makes me happy. So does reading Larkin's The Whitsun Weddings.
That Whitsun, I was late getting away. Not till about 1:20 on the sunlit Saturday did my three-quarters empty train pull out, all windows down, all cushions hot, all sense of being in a hurry gone. We ran behind the backs of houses, crossed a street of blinding windscreens, smelt the fish dock, and thence the river's level drifting breadth began, where Skye and Lincolnshire and water meet. All afternoon, through the tall heat that slept for miles inland, a slow and stopping curve southwards we kept. Wide farms went by, short-shadowed cattle, and canals with floatings of industrial froth. A hothouse flashed uniquely. Hedges dipped and rose, and now and then a smell of grass displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth, until the next town, new and nondescript, approached with acres of dismantled cars. At first, I didn't notice what a noise the weddings made each station that we stopped at. Sun destroys the interest of what's happening in the shade, and down the long, cool platforms, whoops and skirls, I took for porters larking with the mails, and went on reading. Once we started, though, we passed them, grinning and pomaded, girls in parodies of fashion, heels and veils, all posed irresolutely, watching us go, as if out on the end of an event, waving goodbye to something that survived it. Struck, I leant more promptly out next time, more curiously, and saw it all again in different terms. The fathers with broad belts under their suits and seamy foreheads, mothers loud and fat, and uncles shouting smut, and then the perms, the nylon gloves and jewellery substitutes, the lemons, mauves and olive ochres that marked off the girls unreally from the rest. Yes, from cafes and banquet halls up yards and bunting-dressed coach party annexes, the wedding days were coming to an end. All down the line, fresh couples climbed aboard. The rest stood round. The last confetti and advice were thrown, and as we moved, each face seemed to define just what it saw departing. Children frowned as something dull. Fathers had never known success so huge and wholly farcical. The women shared the secret like a happy funeral, while girls, gripping their handbags tighter, stared at a religious wounding. Free at last, and loaded with the sum of all they saw, we hurried towards London, shuffling gouts of steam. Now fields were building plots, and poplars cast long shadows over major roads, and for some 50 minutes that in time would seem just long enough to settle hats and say, I nearly died. A dozen marriages got underway. They watched the landscape sitting side by side. An Odeon went past, a cooling tower, and someone running up to bowl. And none thought of the others they would never meet, or how their lives would all contain this hour. I thought of London, spread out in the sun, its postal districts packed like squares of wheat. There we were aimed, and as we raced across bright knots of rail past standing Pullmans, walls of blackened moss came close, and it was nearly done, this frail travelling coincidence. And what it held stood ready to be loosed, with all the power that being changed can give. We slowed again, and as the tightened brakes took hold, there swelled a sense of falling, like an arrow shower sent out of sight, somewhere becoming rain.
Anyone who's ever made a train journey from Hull to anywhere will recognise the place along the track where Skye and Lincolnshire and Water meet, and enjoy the memory all the more by remembering those words. Poems like that are said to display what critics call a captivating accuracy, which catches the physical feel of life in England in our time. But the accuracy is notably lacking in sympathy. In what's called Larkin's compassionate despair, the despair is far more obvious than the compassion. The people he passes on that sunlit Saturday are mothers loud and fat, an uncle shouting smut, and then the perms, the nylon gloves and jewellery substitutes. That's not an affectionate portrait of our fellow men. And similar descriptions, particularly concerning the tawdry taste of the working classes, appear in many Larkin poems. His devotion to social detail makes him a social poet of a sort, but in his case the term has a very special meaning. He observes, but he doesn't sympathise. He sees, but he doesn't feel. And he's not mellowed with the years. In more recent poems, despair has simply turned into desolation. His poem, The Building, describes a hospital in which all the patients know that death is inevitable. Not yet, perhaps not here, but in the end. Really, it isn't suitable reading for anybody over 35.
Higher than the handsomest hotel, the lucent comb shows up for miles. But see, all-rounded, close-ribbed streets rise and fall like a great sigh out of the last century. The porters are scruffy. What keeps drawing up at the entrance are not taxis. And in the hall, as well as creepers, hangs a frightening smell. There are paperbacks and tea at so much a cup, like an airport lounge. But those who tamely sit on rows of steel chairs, turning the ripped mags, haven't come far. More like a local bus, these outdoor clothes and half-filled shopping bags, and faces restless and resigned, although every few minutes comes a kind of nurse to fetch someone away. The rest refit cups back to saucers, cough, or glance below seats for dropped gloves or cards. Humans caught on ground curiously neutral. Homes and names suddenly in abeyance. Some are young, some old, but most in that vague age that claims the end of choice, the last of hope, and all here to confess that something has gone wrong. It must be error of a serious sort, for see how many floors it needs, how tall it's grown by now, and how much money goes in trying to correct it. See the time, 11:30 on a working day, and these picked out of it. See as they climb to their appointed levels, how their eyes go to each other, guessing. On the way, someone's wheeled past, in washed-to-rags ward clothes. They see him too. They're quiet. To realize this new thing held in common makes them quiet. For past these doors are rooms, and rooms past those, and more rooms yet, each one further off and harder to return from. And who knows which he will see and when? For the moment, wait. Look down at the yard. Outside seems old enough. Red brick, lagged pipes, and someone walking by it. Out to the car park, free. Then past the gate, traffic. A locked church. Short terraced streets where kids chalk games and girls with hairdos fetch their separates from the cleaners. Oh world, your loves, your chances are beyond the stretch of any hand from here. And so unreal, a touching dream to which we all are lulled but wake from separately. In it, conceits and self-protecting ignorance congeal to carry life, collapsing only when called to these corridors. For now once more the nurse beckons. Each gets up and goes at last. Some will be out by lunch, or 4. Others, not knowing it, have come to join the unseen congregations whose white rows lie set apart above. Women, men, old, young, crude faces of the only coin this place accepts. All know they are going to die. Not yet, perhaps not here, but in the end. And somewhere like this. That is what it means, this clean sliced cliff, a struggle to transcend the thought of dying. For unless its powers outbuild cathedrals, nothing contravenes the coming dark, though crowds each evening try with wasteful, weak, propitiatory flowers.
Occasionally, glimmers of hope creep in, almost behind the poet's back. One of them is seen in the echoes of Thomas Hardy, who became Larkin's preeminent influence after he'd escaped from the effects of Yeats' wordy Irish melancholy. In Tess of the d'Urbervilles and the Mayor of Casterbridge, Hardy himself had a couple of things to say about blind fate, but he also believed in a sort of redemption, born of the simple virtues of rural England. In Show Saturday, Larkin gives detail after detail about a local fair and the people who cluster between the stalls and the sideshows. His descriptions are genuinely nostalgic, almost affectionate, but the poem ends with another favourite Larkin theme, the degeneration of society, redeemed only by its connection with a better but past age.
Grey day for the show, but cars jam the narrow lanes. Inside on the field, judging has started. Dogs set their legs back, hold out their tails, and ponies, manes repeatedly smooth to calm heads. Over there, sheep, Cheviot and Blackface. By the hedge, squealing logs, chainsaw competition. Each has its own keen crowd. In the main arena, more judges meet by a jeep. The jumping's on next.
Announcements, splutteringly loud, clash with the quack of a man with pound notes round his hat and a lit-up board. There's more than just animals. Bead stalls, balloon men, a bank, a beer marquee that half screens a canvas gents, a tent selling tweed and another jackets. Folks sit about on bales like great straw dice, for each scene is linked by spaces, not given to anything much, where kids scrap, freed, while their owners stare different ways with incurious faces.
The wrestling starts, late. A wide ring of people, then cars, then trees, then pale sky. 2 young men in acrobats' tights and embroidered trunks hug each other, rock over the grass, stiff-legged in a 2-man scrum. One falls, they shake hands. 2 more start, one grey-haired. He wins, though. They're not so much fights as long immobile strainings that end in unbalance, with one on his back unharmed, while the other stands, smoothing his hair.
But there are other talents. The long high tent of growing and making, wired-off wood tables, past which crowds shuffle, eyeing the scrubbed, spaced extrusions of earth, blanched leeks like church candles, 6 pods of broad beans, one split open, dark, shining leafed cabbages, rows of single supreme versions, followed on laced paper mats by dairy and kitchen, 4 brown eggs, 4 white eggs, 4 plain scones, 4 dropped scones, pure excellences that enclose a recession of skills, and after them lambing sticks, rugs, needlework, knitted caps, baskets, all worthy, all well done, but less than the honeycombs.
Outside, the jumping's over. The young ones thunder their ponies in competition, twice round the ring, then trick races, musical stalls, sliding off, riding bareback, the ponies dragged to and fro for bewildering requirements, not minding. But now in the background, like shifting scenery, horse boxes move. Each crawls towards the stock entrance, tilting and swaying, bound for far-off farms.
The pound note man decamps. The car park has thinned. They're loading jumps on a truck. Back now to private addresses, gates and lamps in high stone one-street villages, empty at dusk, and side roads of small towns, sports finals stuck in front doors, allotments reaching down to the railway. Back now to autumn, leaving the ended husk of summer that brought them here for show Saturday.
The men with hunters, dog-breeding, wool-defined women, children all saddle-swank, mug-faced, middle-aged wives glaring at jellies, husbands on leave from the garden, watchful as weasels, cartooning curt-haired sons. Back now, all of them, to their local lives. To names on vans and business calendars hung up in kitchens, back to loud occasions in the corn exchange, to market days in bars, to winter coming, as the dismantled show itself dies back into the area of work. Let it stay hidden there like strength below sale bills and swindling, something people do, not noticing how time's rolling smithy smoke shadows much greater gestures, something they share that breaks ancestrally each year into regenerate union. Let it always be there.
But despite all our reservations, this programme pays homage to Philip Larkin. Critical homage, but homage nevertheless. It's for that reason that I've chosen to end with a poem of unsurpassed merit. It's called Dockery & Son, and it has moved me more than any other modern poem I have ever read. It concerns the solitary existence, not just the solitary life, but equally the solitary temperament. Dockery & Son is about what, for some people, is the inevitability of solitude. It's an account of an Oxford reunion and the discovery that a fellow undergraduate had fathered a child. Why, the poem asks, did he think adding meant increase? To me, it was dilution. For life is first boredom, then fear. Whether or not we use it, it goes, and leaves what something hidden from us chose, and age, and then the only end of age. It's one of the most beautiful and one of the saddest poems I know. If a good fairy offered me a single poetic gift, I'd choose the ability to write this poem, as long as I was certain that I would not also come to accept its doleful view of life. Dockery was junior to you, wasn't he? Said the Dean. His son's here now. Death-suited, visitant, I nod. And do you keep in touch with, or remember how, black-gowned, unbreakfasted, and still half tight, we used to stand before that desk to give our version of these incidents last night? I tried the door of where I used to live. Locked. The lawn spreads dazzlingly wide. A known bell chimes. I catch my train ignored. Canals and clouds and colleges subside slowly from view. But Dockery, good Lord, anyone up to date must have been born in 43 when I was 21. If he was younger, did he get this son at 19, 20? Was he that withdrawn, high-collared public schoolboy sharing rooms with Cartwright who was killed? Well, it just shows how much, how little. Yawning, I suppose I fell asleep, waking at the fumes and furnace glares of Sheffield, where I changed and ate an awful pie and walked along the platform to its end to see the range joining and parting lines reflect a strong, unhindered moon. To have no son, no wife, no house or land still seemed quite natural. Only a numbness registered the shock of finding out how much had gone of life, how widely from the others. Dockery now, only 19, he must have taken stock of what he wanted and been capable of. No, that's not the difference. Rather how convinced he was he should be added to. Why did he think adding meant increase? To me, it was dilution. Where do these innate assumptions come from? Not from what we think truest, almost want to do. Those warp tight shut like doors. They're more a style our lives bring with them. Habit for a while, suddenly they harden into all we've got and how we got it. Look back on, they rear like sand clouds, thick and close, embodying for Dockery's sun, for me, nothing. Nothing with all the sun's harsh patronage. Life is first boredom, then fear. Whether or not we use it, it goes, and leaves what something hidden from us chose. And age, and then the only end of age. My thanks to Judi Dench, and my thanks to Alan Bennett, and thank you very much for coming. Good night.
One poet to another. Next on BBC 4, from the BBC archives, a fascinating conversation between Philip Larkin and John Benjamin.